What happens when a man drunk on his own ego decides to publicly humiliate the woman who gave up everything for him? He stood there, surrounded by his so-called friends, laughing as he called his ex-wife broke and boring. He thought she was a ghost from his past, a forgotten chapter in his climb to the top. He had no idea she was about to become his future's biggest nightmare. What he didn't see just feet away was a $500,000 Bentley gliding to the curb. And in the next 60 seconds, the woman who stepped out, escorted by one of the world's most powerful men, wouldn't just shatter his pride. She would detonate his entire world. Stay with us as we uncover the incredible true story of Sophia Hayes. The divorce papers had called it an irretrievable breakdown. For Sophia Hayes, that clinical phrase was a laughable understatement. Her marriage hadn't broken down. It had been systematically dismantled, piece by piece, by the man she'd once promised to love forever, Gregory Shaw. Their life together had been a story written in his font. When they met, Sophia was a brilliant art history graduate fielding junior curator offers from 2 prestigious museums. Gregory was a junior analyst with a smile that could sell sand in the Sahara and an ambition that burned like a forest fire. He'd painted a beautiful picture for her. "Let me get established." "Soph," he'd cooed his hand on her cheek. "Just a few years. Support me now, and once I'm a partner, the world is yours. You can build your own gallery. We'll travel. You won't have to answer to anyone." She believed him. She took a quiet, stable job in university administration, flexible hours, decent benefits, so she could be there for his late nights, host his networking dinners, and edit his presentations. She poured her intelligence not into museum catalogues, but into making him look smarter, more polished. Her dream was deferred, placed carefully on a high shelf to be dusted off later, but later never came. As Gregory climbed the ladder at the Chicago finance firm, Harrington and Finch, his suits got more expensive and his compliments became rarer. Her quiet support system, once his rock, was now a rut. Her love for art history, once fascinating, was now a boring hobby. The final blow came when he announced he was leaving her for a 24-year-old Instagram influencer named Tiffany Monroe, a woman whose primary contribution to the world was posting selfies with luxury brand hashtags. The divorce was brutal and swift. Gregory, with his high-powered lawyers, argued that Sophia hadn't contributed financially in years. He painted her as a freeloader, a simple woman who lacked drive. He got the sprawling Lincoln Park condo, the portfolio, the country club membership. She got her modest savings, a used Honda, and a court-ordered alimony payment that was just enough to be insulting. 18 months later, Sophia was living a life Gregory had designed for her in his absence, the life of a broke and boring woman. She lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in Ukrainian village, the radiators hissing in the winter and the window air conditioner rattling in the summer. The vibrant, ambitious woman had faded, replaced by a ghost who haunted the periphery of her own life. She worked as a remote academic researcher for a university on the East Coast, a job that paid the bills but starved her soul. Her world had shrunk to the size of her laptop screen. The highlight of her week was visiting the Art Institute of Chicago, not as a curator, but as a paying guest. She would stand for an hour in front of Surratt's A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, losing herself in the tiny dots of paint, a million tiny pieces that somehow came together to create something whole and beautiful. It was a metaphor for a life she felt she could no longer lead. She felt like one of those dots, isolated, small, and meaningless on its own. One crisp October afternoon, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in her mailbox. It stood out amongst the bills and junk mail like a cardinal in a flock of pigeons. Her name and address were written in elegant calligraphy. It was an invitation to the annual St. Jude's Charity Gala, the premier event of the Chicago social season, held at the historic Symphony Center. Her first instinct was to laugh. It was a cruel joke. She and Gregory had attended every year. It was his stage. He'd glide through the room, clapping backs, laughing too loudly, with her trailing silently behind him, a beautiful but muted accessory. The invitation was undoubtedly a clerical error, a holdover from a mailing list that hadn't been updated. She was about to toss it when a cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt in months, pricked at her heart. She imagined Gregory there, with Tiffany clinging to his arm. She could hear his smug voice introducing his new improved life to his colleagues. She could picture their pitying glances if they saw her the discarded wife. The thought was nauseating. She threw the invitation on her small kitchen counter, a stark white rectangle on the worn formica. For 3 days, it sat there, mocking her. "Toss it," her mind screamed. "It's an invitation to your own humiliation." But on the 4th day, something shifted. As she was staring at her reflection in the dark screen of her monitor, she didn't see a ghost anymore. She saw a prisoner, and she realized that Gregory wasn't just her ex-husband. He was her warden, and her prison was the shame he had so expertly constructed around her. He still controlled her even from afar. The fear of seeing him, of being judged by him, was just another bar on her cage. A strange, unfamiliar resolve began to bubble up from deep within her. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. She picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over a number she hadn't dialed in nearly a year. A name that represented a world she thought she had left behind forever. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and stale coffee, and pressed call. "Adrian," she said, her voice a little shaky. "It's Sophia Hayes. I know this is out of the blue, but I have a proposition for you. And I need a favor." On the other end of the line, in a minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park, the reclusive tech billionaire Adrian Thorne, a man who hadn't attended a public event in 5 years, smiled. "Sophia." He said, his voice calm and warm. "I was wondering when you'd call. Tell me everything." Adrian Thorne was a myth in the worlds of tech and finance. He had created Logos, a data synthesis algorithm, so revolutionary it had reshaped global logistics, making him a billionaire before he was 30. But unlike his peers who bought sports teams and mega yachts, Adrian had retreated. He hated the spotlight, finding the sycophancy of the ultra-rich to be soul-crushingly tedious. His true passion, the one thing he poured his fortune into, was art. He wasn't a collector in the traditional sense. He was a preservationist, a digital archivist. He had first encountered Sophia Hayes, not in person, but through her words. 2 years before her divorce, while she was still languishing in her administrative job, Sophia had spent her evenings and weekends writing a long-form academic paper. It was a brilliant, searing analysis of the decay of Renaissance-era frescoes, proposing a radical new methodology for digital restoration using predictive modeling based on chemical composition. She submitted it to a niche art conservation journal, never expecting to hear anything back. Adrian, an avid reader of such journals, came across her paper. He was stunned. It wasn't just the idea, it was the elegance of her prose, the fierce intelligence that blazed through the dense academic language. He saw a mind that connected disparate fields, art chemistry data, in a way he had only ever dreamed of. He reached out to her via the university email listed in the byline, expressing his admiration and asking a few technical questions. Sophia, shocked to receive an email from the legendary Adrian Thorne, had replied with a detailed, enthusiastic response. A correspondence began. It was purely professional, a meeting of two powerful intellects, but it was the most intellectually stimulating connection Sophia had experienced in years. For a few hours a week, typing emails to Adrian, she wasn't Gregory Shaw's wife. She was Sophia Hayes, the scholar. When Gregory found out about the emails, he'd been dismissive. Some tech nerd so focused on what matters. "Mrs. Harrington's garden party is next week. I need you to charm her." The correspondence had dwindled as her marriage entered its final, ugly death spiral. After the divorce, lost and adrift, Sophia hadn't thought to reach out. She was too ashamed. What would she say? The brilliant man you thought I was is gone. I'm just a divorcee in a cheap apartment now. But Adrian hadn't forgotten. He had his own team discreetly look into her situation. He learned about the divorce, about the way Shaw had cast her aside. It offended his sense of justice. Talent like hers, he believed, was a resource more valuable than any commodity, and to see it squandered by a preening fool like Gregory Shaw was a crime. So when she finally called, he was ready. A proposition and a favor. Adrian repeated, his voice devoid of surprise. I'm listening. Sophia explained, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. She told him about the gala, about her initial fear, and her newfound resolve. The favor is, I was hoping you might attend with me. I know you don't do these things, and it's an absurd ask, but I'll be there, he said, without hesitation. The proposition. This was the hard part. This was the leap. Your company, Thorn Industries, has the processing power. I have the methodology. Together we could build the world's most advanced art preservation archive, a digital library of Alexandria for the world's masterpieces. We could create a non-profit foundation, the Thorn Hayes Archive, to fund and manage it. This gala, it's the perfect place to announce it. It's full of patrons, museum directors, the very people we need on board. There was a long silence on the line. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. She had overstepped. It was too much, too soon. Sophia, Adrian said finally, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I've had a team of 50 engineers trying to crack the practical application of your paper for the last 6 months. They've made almost no progress. I didn't want to launch a pale imitation of your idea. I wanted the architect. I wasn't just going to be your date to the gala. I was already planning to fly to Chicago next week to offer you the position of CEO of the entire project. Sophia sank onto her worn-out sofa, the phone pressed hard against her ear. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or shame. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Someone saw her. Someone had seen her all along. The next 10 days were a whirlwind. Adrian's team descended, not with pity, but with purpose. A high-end laptop and encrypted servers were installed in her apartment. Contracts were express-mailed and signed. A woman, named Evelyn, Adrian's unflappable chief of staff, called her Mr. Thorn has arranged a wardrobe for the gala. Sophia, Evelyn said in a crisp, businesslike tone, a stylist will be at your apartment tomorrow at 10. We have also taken the liberty of booking you a suite at the Peninsula for the night of the event. It will be easier to get ready there. Sophia was overwhelmed. Evelyn, this is too much. I can't accept, Sophia. Evelyn cut in gently. You are the CEO of the Thorn Hayes Archive. This is not a personal gift. It is a corporate expense. You are representing the foundation. You need to look the part. The stylist, a chic woman named Anja, arrived with rolling racks of designer gowns. She didn't try to transform Sophia into someone else. Instead, she seemed to see the woman who had been buried. You have a classical beauty, Anja mused, holding up a swatch of deep sapphire silk. Like a Sargent portrait. We should lean into that. Elegant, timeless, powerful. They chose a gown by a less-known but incredibly chic designer, a column of midnight blue silk that draped over her frame with a single dramatic sweep of fabric over one shoulder. It was understated, yet utterly commanding. It was the dress of a woman who didn't need sequins to shine. As the day of the gala approached, Sophia felt a tectonic shift within her. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was being drowned out by a rising symphony of excitement and purpose. She spent hours on video calls with Adrian and his team, fleshing out the launch strategy. Her mind, so long dormant, was firing on all cylinders. She felt alive. The night before the gala, she was packing an overnight bag in her apartment when she found an old photo album tucked away in a closet. She flipped it open. There was a picture of her and Gregory from their 3rd anniversary standing outside a restaurant. He was beaming his arm possessively around her waist. She looked happy, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She was an accessory, a lovely, well-cared-for possession. She closed the album and put it back in the closet. That woman was gone. Tomorrow night, she wouldn't be an accessory to anyone. She was the main exhibit. Gregory Shaw surveyed his reflection in the gilt-framed mirror of his condo. His custom-made tuxedo fit him like a second skin. His new Patek Philippe watch, a purchase he couldn't really afford, but considered essential, gleamed under the recessed lighting. Tonight was important. Harrington and Finch had been bleeding clients, and a recent high-risk investment he'd championed had gone disastrously wrong. He needed to project success more than ever. The St. Jude's Gala wasn't just a party, it was a hunting ground for new capital, a place to repair his slightly tarnished reputation. "Greg, does this filter make me look more sun-kissed or more jaundiced?" Tiffany Monroe called from the living room, her face illuminated by her phone screen. She was squeezed into a garish, rose-gold sequined dress that left little to the imagination. "You look amazing, babe," he said, without turning around. He adjusted his bow tie, his mind on his targets for the evening. Perry Donovan, the real estate tycoon, and Michael Chen, the hedge fund manager. He needed to get 5 minutes with each of them, plant the seed for a new can't-miss fund he was cobbling together. "I can't wait for everyone to see us," Tiffany said, now practicing her pout in the mirror. "That reporter from Chicago scene will be there. We need a perfect picture. Remember what happened to Sophia that one year when she spilled wine on Alderman Casey's wife? God, that was so embarrassing for you." Gregory smirked at the memory. Sophia was from another era, sweet, but, boring, no edge. She belonged in a library, not a ballroom. He felt a familiar pang of satisfaction. Leaving her had been the best decision he'd ever made. It was like trading in a reliable but dated sedan for a brand new sports car. Tiffany was flashy, she was fun, she looked good on his arm, and even better on Instagram. She was an asset. As they rode the elevator down to the waiting limo, his phone buzzed. It was a margin call notification from his broker. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. He quickly deleted the message and forced a smile. Tonight had to be a success. Meanwhile, across town, at the Peninsula Hotel, Sophia was undergoing a different kind of transformation. The hotel suite was larger than her entire apartment, with panoramic views of the city she had once felt so lost in. Anya, the stylist, and a quiet professional hair and makeup artist, worked with calm efficiency. As they worked, Sophia was on a final prep call with Adrian, who had flown in that afternoon on his private jet. "The introduction is set." Adrian's voice came through her AirPods, steady and reassuring. "At 9:30 p.m., the gala chairman, Mr. Davenport, will cede the stage to me for a special announcement. I'll speak for 2 minutes, then I'll introduce you as the CEO and visionary behind the project. You'll say a few words, we'll unveil the landing page for the Foundation's website, and then we field questions." "Simple. Simple for you," maybe Sophia said, a nervous laugh escaping her. "You'll be brilliant, Sophia. Just tell them your vision. Speak from the heart. The rest is just noise." When the preparations were complete, Sophia stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, yet more herself than she had been in a decade. The midnight blue dress was a masterpiece of tailoring, hinting at a strength she was only just rediscovering. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was subtle, emphasizing the intelligence in her dark eyes. She wore a single piece of jewelry, loaned for the evening, a delicate diamond necklace that whispered rather than shouted its value. Evelyn knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Thorne is waiting for you downstairs, Sophia." "The car is ready." Taking a deep breath, Sophia walked out of the suite and towards the elevator. With each step, she felt the ghosts of her past life, the shame, the insecurity, the feeling of being second best receding behind her. She wasn't Gregory Shaw's dowdy ex-wife anymore. She was Sophia Hayes' CEO, and she was on her way to work. The drive to the Symphony Centre was quiet. Adrian dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit with no tie. A subtle act of rebellion sensed her nervousness. "Remember that fresco you wrote about?" he asked, his voice low. "The one in Florence by Ghirlandaio. You described how the restorers had to painstakingly chip away centuries of grime and clumsy overpainting to reveal the original masterpiece underneath." Sophia nodded, understanding his point. Tonight, he said, his eyes meeting hers, "You are not revealing a new painting. You are simply showing them the masterpiece that was there all along." As their car, a discreet but imposing black Maybach, joined the queue of vehicles outside the venue, Sophia noticed a familiar silver Bentley just ahead of them. She knew it belonged to Robert Kensington, a senior partner at Gregory's firm. Her heart gave a small, nervous flutter. He was here. He was close. The final test was about to begin. The entrance to the Symphony Centre was a controlled storm of flashing cameras, valet attendants, and Chicago's elite. Gregory Shaw, with Tiffany plastered to his side, stepped out of his leased Maserati and immediately began to perform. He waved to a photographer he knew, shared a loud, hearty laugh with a fellow banker, and expertly guided Tiffany towards the red carpet. He was in his element. He felt powerful, admired. He spotted Perry Donovan by the grand staircase and made a mental note to intercept him after the champagne toast. Everything was going according to plan. "Gregory, look," Tiffany whispered, nudging him with her elbow. She pointed towards a small, cordoned-off area where reporters were conducting interviews. "It's that blogger, Windy City Whispers. Her posts get like 1 million views." Gregory's eyes followed her gaze. He saw the blogger, but he also saw who she was talking to, his old colleague William Stafford and his wife. He steered Tiffany in their direction, a predator's smile on his face. This was a perfect opportunity to hold court. "Billy, my man." "You look sharp," Gregory boomed, clapping William on the back a little too hard. "And Brenda, stunning as always." After the requisite air kisses and empty compliments, William leaned in. "So, Greg, haven't seen you since the merger talks. Heard things got a little rocky." Gregory waved a dismissive hand. "Paper tigers, Billy. You know how it is. You have to spend money to make money." He needed to change the subject. And then he saw her, standing near the less crowded guest check-in, almost hidden behind a marble pillar, was Sophia. She was alone. From this distance, he couldn't make out the details of what she was wearing, only that it was dark and simple. She looked exactly as he pictured her, lost, out of place, a wallflower at the biggest party of the year. A surge of vindictive pity washed over him. How pathetic. Did she come here hoping to run into him to make him feel guilty? "Oh my God, is that—" Sophia Tiffany said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "She looks so sad. And what is she wearing?" This was his moment. With his audience of William, Brenda, and Tiffany hanging on his every word, Gregory let the smirk he'd been holding back finally take over his face. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial, theatrical whisper, just loud enough for those around him to hear clearly. "I almost feel bad for her." He began shaking his head slowly. "When we were married, I tried to get her interested in life, but she was always happier with her dusty old books." He chuckled, a cruel, condescending sound. "I'm glad she's out of the house, I guess, but some people just aren't cut out for this world. She's a sweet girl, but honestly, utterly broke and boring." Brenda Stafford shifted uncomfortably, but William, a man of similar ilk to Gregory, chuckled along. Tiffany squeezed his arm. "You're too nice, Greg. You gave her a great life." "I tried," Gregory said with a final magnanimous sigh. "But you can't turn a librarian into a lioness." He felt a rush of superiority. He had defined her. He had put her back in the box he'd created for her. He was Gregory Shaw, the titan of finance, and she was his sad, forgotten starter wife. The narrative was secure. Sophia had been waiting for the text from Evelyn to say they were clear to enter. She had deliberately hung back from the main throng, taking a moment to steady her nerves. And then she heard it, his voice. It cut through the ambient chatter of the lobby like a shard of glass. She didn't have to see him to know he was talking about her. The condescending tone, the feigned pity, the specific wounding words. Broke and boring. The words echoed in the grand hall, but they felt like they were being whispered directly into her ear. For a split second, the old Sophia resurfaced. The shame washed over her, hot and suffocating. Her first instinct was to turn to flee, to run back to the car and hide. The prison door he had built was slamming shut again. But then something else happened. The heat of shame was instantly vaporized by the white-hot fire of pure, undiluted rage. Not just rage at Gregory, but rage at herself for ever letting this man have such power over her. Boring, she had debated 17th century art patrons with one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. Broke, she was about to become the CEO of a multi-million-dollar foundation that would change the world. He hadn't just misjudged her. He was living in a completely different reality. He was a man shouting at a shadow, completely oblivious to the person she had become. And in that moment, all her fear vanished. It was replaced by a chilling calm. This wasn't her trial, it was his. She saw a valet attendant, a young man with a kind face, looking at her with concern, having overheard Gregory's comment. Sophia gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, a silent acknowledgement. Then she looked past him, towards the main entrance, as a text message vibrated in her small clutch. It was from Evelyn. It contained a single word, now. Sophia straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and took one step out from behind the pillar into the light. Just as Gregory finished his pronouncement, a new energy rippled through the entrance lobby. The frenetic energy of the paparazzi, which had begun to wane, suddenly surged with a renewed, almost frantic intensity. The flashes weren't just sporadic anymore. They were a solid, blinding wall of light. A murmur went through the crowd, a wave of whispers and craned necks. "What's going on?" Tiffany asked, annoyed that the attention had shifted away from them. Gregory, irritated by the interruption, peered towards the curb. A vehicle was pulling up, but it wasn't a flashy Lamborghini or a classic Rolls-Royce. It was a Bentley Mulsanne, long and sleek, painted a custom shade of graphite that seemed to drink the light. It was a car that didn't need to be loud to announce its owner's wealth. Its silence was its statement. "Probably some old money dinosaur," Gregory muttered, turning back to William. But William wasn't listening. He, like everyone else, was staring at the Bentley. The driver, a professional in a crisp suit, quickly opened the rear passenger door. A single, impeccably polished Oxford shoe emerged, followed by a man who unfolded himself from the car with an easy grace. He was tall and lean, his dark suit tailored to perfection. He wore no tie. Even from 50 feet away, there was an unmistakable aura of power about him. But it was a quiet, self-contained power, not the performative bravado Gregory relied on. "My God," William Stafford breathed, his voice filled with awe. "Is that Adrian Thorne?" Gregory's blood ran cold. Adrian Thorne, the mythical tech hermit here at the St. Jude's Gala. It was impossible. The man hadn't been photographed in public for years. Gregory's mind raced, trying to calculate the angle. Was Thorne's company a new sponsor? Was he making an acquisition? Adrian Thorne didn't even glance at the clamoring press. He simply turned back to the open door and extended his hand. And then time seemed to slow down. A woman's hand, elegant and unadorned save for the dark blue of her nails, took his. She emerged from the car, not like a starlet, but like a queen. The midnight blue silk of her dress flowed around her, a stark, stunning contrast to the gaudy sequins and bright colors that filled the room. Her hair was swept up her neck, long and graceful, adorned with the subtle fire of a diamond necklace. She turned her head towards the light, and a collective gasp went through the onlookers. It was Sophia, but it wasn't the Sophia they knew. It wasn't the mousy, apologetic faculty wife or the sad divorced woman Gregory had just described. This was a woman who radiated a confidence so profound it was almost unnerving. Her expression was serene, her posture perfect. She looked directly ahead, her eyes calm and focused. Gregory felt as if he had been punched in the gut. His brain couldn't process the image. The Sophia he held in his mind, the broke and boring woman, simply could not coexist with the vision of power and elegance now walking towards him. The two realities were tearing his perception apart. Is she with him? Tiffany stammered, her own carefully constructed facade cracking. The Instagram influencer suddenly looked cheap and desperate next to Sophia's timeless grace. Adrian Thorne placed a light, respectful hand on the small of Sophia's back and guided her towards the entrance. They moved as a unit, a silent, formidable team. The sea of people parted for them instinctively. The gala chairman, a portly, important man named Mr. Davenport, rushed forward, his face beaming. Mr. Thorne, what an incredible honor. We had no idea you were coming, he gushed. Adrian smiled politely. Thank you for having us, Howard, he said, his voice carrying easily. Then he gestured to Sophia. And please allow me to introduce my partner, Sophia Hayes. He didn't say my date or my girlfriend. He said partner. The word hung in the air, laden with significance. They walked past Gregory's small group without a flicker of recognition. Sophia's eyes didn't even graze him. To her, he was just part of the scenery, as insignificant as a potted fern. The cut was so deep, so absolute, it was more devastating than any screaming match or public confrontation could ever have been. It wasn't hatred, it was indifference. It was erasure. William Stafford stared dumbfounded from the radiant Sophia to the ashen-faced Gregory. He slowly took a step away from his old colleague, as if proximity might be contagious. Gregory stood frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of disbelief and dawning horror. In the space of 30 seconds, his entire world had been turned upside down. The woman he had just publicly branded as a pathetic failure had arrived with one of the richest, most enigmatic men on the planet, looking not like his discarded past, but like everyone's future. The narrative hadn't just been challenged, it had been incinerated. And in its place, a terrifying new question began to form in his mind. What else did he not know? The grand ballroom of the Symphony Center was a universe of crystal champagne and carefully cultivated power. Gregory Shaw stumbled through it like a ghost. He had lost Tiffany somewhere near the oyster bar, her chatter about getting a selfie with a billionaire fading into the background noise of his own roaring panic. He watched from behind a marble column as Sophia and Adrian Thorne were personally escorted to the head table where they sat with Mr. Davenport, Senator Thompson, and other luminaries he could only dream of networking with. Sophia was luminous. She laughed at something the senator said, her face animated and intelligent. She wasn't just sitting there, she was holding her own, a peer among titans. The sight was a physical torment to Gregory. Every confident gesture she made, every respectful nod she received from the people at her table was a nail in the coffin of his superiority. At 9:30, Emma scheduled, Mr. Davenport took the stage. After the usual thank yous, his voice took on a new level of excitement. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special, unannounced guest tonight. He is a visionary who has reshaped the digital world, and tonight he is here to share a new vision with us. It is my immense privilege to welcome Mr. Adrian Thorne. A wave of applause and excited murmurs swept the room. Gregory felt a cold sweat on his brow. Adrian Thorne walked to the podium with the same quiet confidence he had shown all evening. Thank you, Howard. Thank you all, Adrian began. I'm not usually one for public speaking. I prefer data to dinner parties. But I'm here tonight because we are at a precipice. For centuries, our greatest artistic treasures have been at the mercy of time, war and decay. Masterpieces vanish, fade, and are lost forever. We believe technology can change that. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. For the past year, my company has been working to build a new kind of institution, a non-profit foundation dedicated to creating a complete, universally accessible digital archive of the world's most important works of art using revolutionary imaging and preservation technology. Tonight, I am proud to announce the formation of the Thorn-Hayes Archive. The name hit Gregory like a physical blow. Thorn-Hayes. Not just her date, not just her companion. Her name was on the marquee right next to the Billionaires. But an idea is only as good as the mind that conceives it. Adrian continued, his voice resonating with genuine admiration. And the architectural vision, the genius behind this entire methodology, does not belong to me. It belongs to a scholar of extraordinary talent and foresight. It is my distinct honor to introduce the founding CEO of the Thorn-Hayes Archive, Ms. Sophia Hayes. He turned and gestured to Sophia. The spotlight found her as she rose from her seat and walked to the podium. The entire room was silent, captivated. She looked out at the sea of faces, her gaze sweeping past Gregory without a hint of recognition. "Thank you, Adrian," she began, her voice clear and steady, with no trace of the nervous woman he had once known. "Art is not a luxury. It is our collective memory. It is the story of who we are. For too long, that story has been fragile." She spoke for 5 minutes, but in that time she painted a picture of the future, so compelling, so brilliant, that the entire room was spellbound. She spoke of art data and legacy with a passion and intelligence that was breathtaking. This was not the boring woman who read books. This was a visionary, a leader. When she finished, the room erupted in thunderous applause. People were on their feet. Museum directors, philanthropists, and investors were already huddling, their excitement palpable. Gregory felt like he was suffocating. He backed away from the column and stumbled towards the veranda, desperate for air. He ripped his bow tie off his chest, tight. It was all a lie. His entire perception of their marriage of her was a fiction he had written to soothe his own ego. She hadn't been boring, she had been bored. Bored with him. Bored with the small, suffocating box he had put her in. He was leaning against the balustrade, trying to catch his breath, when a voice spoke from behind him. "Quite a turn of events, isn't it, Shaw?" It was Howard Davenport, the gala chairman, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Gregory. I had no idea," Gregory stammered. Davenport took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on the ballroom, where Sophia was now surrounded by admirers. "You know, it's a funny thing. I remember her from years ago. She applied for the head curator position at the Museum of Contemporary Art. Her file came across my desk. She was by a wide margin the most brilliant candidate we had seen in a decade." Gregory's heart stopped. He remembered that. Sophia had been so excited working on her application for weeks. She'd been a finalist. "We were going to offer her the job," Davenport continued, his voice turning cold. "But then we got a call. From you." Gregory stared at him, his mind a complete blank. "What? You called my predecessor, John Riley. You told him that you were about to get a big promotion, and that Sophia had decided she wanted to focus on starting a family. You said she was withdrawing her candidacy to support your career, and that she was no longer ambitious for that kind of work. You said she'd be happier as a wife and mother. You asked him to keep the conversation confidential to spare her the embarrassment." Davenport shook his head in disgust. "We thought it was odd, but we respected what we thought were her wishes. We hired our second choice." The memory, deliberately buried for years, came rushing back to Gregory with sickening clarity. He had made that call. He'd been terrified that if she got the job, she would eclipse him. Her world would become bigger, more exciting than his. She would have her own power, her own connections. She might not need him anymore. So in a single cowardly act of sabotage, he had cut her off at the knees to ensure she remained in his shadow. "You didn't just divorce her," Shaw Davenport said, his voice laced with contempt as he put the pieces together. You kneecapped her career out of petty jealousy. And now look at her. He gestured with his glass towards the ballroom. Turns out, you can't keep a mind like that down forever. The only thing that was ever holding her back was you. Davenport finished his whiskey, set the empty glass on the railing, and walked away, leaving Gregory alone in the cold night air. The final detonation had occurred. It wasn't just his pride that was shattered. It was his entire sense of self. He wasn't the hero of his own story. He was the villain. And he had just watched his victim rise from the ashes he had created more powerful and brilliant than he could ever have imagined. The morning after the gala, Gregory Shaw woke to the aggressive glare of sunlight piercing his condo's floor-to-ceiling windows. His head throbbed a dull, insistent drumbeat against his skull. For a fleeting, merciful moment, he believed the events of the previous night were a stress-induced nightmare, a grotesque fantasy cooked up by his anxious mind. Then he saw his tuxedo discarded on a chair like a dead man's skin, and the memory returned with the force of a physical impact. He fumbled for his phone, his thumb shaking as he swiped it open. The screen was a minefield. His news alerts, usually filled with market analysis and stock tips, were dominated by one story. Forbes, the phoenix of philanthropy. How Adrian Thorne and Sophia Hayes will revolutionize art. Bloomberg, Thorne Hayes archive launches with $500 million. Initial endowment shaking up the nonprofit sector. Chicago scene. The very publication Tiffany had been so desperate to be featured in ran a gushing profile under the headline, "The Woman Who Was Hiding in Plain Sight, The Unveiling of Sophia Hayes." He scrolled frantically, his breath catching in his throat. They praised her intellect, her poise, her visionary proposal. They called her the art world's new powerhouse. He searched for his own name, a desperate need to see himself acknowledged in the narrative. He found it buried deep in the 7th paragraph of the Chicago Scene article. It read, "Ms. Hayes, a brilliant academic whose earlier career was reportedly paused for her previous marriage to mid-level finance manager Gregory Shaw, is now poised to become one of the most influential figures in global arts and culture." Mid-level manager, the two words were a death sentence. In his world titles were everything. The phrase was a public demotion, a deliberate and exquisitely cruel dismissal of his entire identity. He had spent a decade clawing his way up, crafting an image of power and influence, and in a single morning, Sophia and her billionaire partner had erased it all with two words. The true nightmare began when he walked into the offices of Harrington and Finch at 10 o'clock. The moment he stepped out of the elevator, he could feel it. The air was different. The usual, boisterous energy of the trading floor was subdued. People went quiet as he passed. His colleagues' men he had shared drinks and inside jokes with just days before suddenly found the patterns on the carpet intensely fascinating. They wouldn't meet his eye. He was no longer a predator in the jungle. He was a wounded animal, and the pack was turning on him. Robert Kensington, the firm's most senior partner, and a man Gregory had spent years trying to impress, was waiting for him in his office. Kensington didn't invite him to sit. He stood by the window, his back to Gregory, looking out over the city. "I received a call this morning from Howard Davenport," Kensington said, his voice dangerously calm. "He was descriptive about your conduct at the gala, both your public comments regarding your ex-wife and the story of your past interference in her career." "Robert, that's a misunderstanding. A private matter." Gregory began, his voice hoarse. Kensington finally turned and his face was granite. "A private matter. Gregory Harrington and Finch has its name on a wing of that museum. We pride ourselves on integrity. You didn't just make a fool of yourself. You behaved in a manner so dishonorable, so profoundly unethical, that it reflects on every single person in this firm. You sabotaged a brilliant woman's career out of sheer pathetic ego." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like poison. "And on top of that, your high-risk fund just lost us $7 million. Your professional judgment is as bankrupt as your character. The choice was simple and brutal. Resign by noon with a paltry severance and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, or be fired for cause with a full public audit of his disastrous trades. By 11:45 a.m., Gregory Shaw was carrying his career in a cardboard box, walking out of the building he once thought he would one day rule. He arrived home to find the condo in a state of chaotic upheaval. Expensive suitcases were open on the floor, filled with Tiffany's designer clothes and shoes. She was on the phone with her mother, her back to him. "I know, Mum. It's a complete disaster. He's a total fraud. My brand can't survive this kind of humiliation." She hung up and finally faced him. Her expression, not of sadness or sympathy, but of pure reptilian fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she shrieked, her voice shrill. "We're a joke. That Windy City Whispers blogger is already writing about the smug banker and his Instagram model girlfriend who got put in their place. My followers are dropping. My sponsors are calling me. You were supposed to be my ticket up. Greg, not an anchor, dragging me down to the bottom. Tiffany, we can get through this," he pleaded. "We—" She laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "There is no we. I'm not going down with your sinking ship." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at him. "You know what the real problem is, Greg? You're not mad that you were cruel to Sophia. You're just mad that you lost. You don't bet on losers. And right now, you are the biggest loser in Chicago." She zipped her last suitcase, the sound echoing the finality of her words. She didn't even look back as she walked out the door, leaving him alone in the monument to a life that was no longer his. The following weeks were a slow, agonizing bleed-out. The margin calls he had ignored came due with a vengeance. The liquidation was swift and merciless. First the condo, then the leased Maserati, then the watch he'd been so proud of. His so-called friends evaporated. Calls went to voicemail, texts went unanswered. He was a social leper. He ended up in a 2-story garden-style apartment complex in Skokie, a suburb he used to fly over without a second thought. The apartment smelled of damp carpet and the ghosts of other people's failed cooking. His view was of a cracked parking lot and a communal dumpster. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, broken only by the sound of his own thoughts, which circled endlessly around one event, the gala. He replayed it over and over the moment Sophia stepped out of that car, a goddess descending from Olympus to pass judgment on a mortal who had long ago forgotten his place. Driven by a desperate, toxic mix of self-loathing and a morbid need for a final confirmation of his own demise, he spent 2 months spiraling. Then, one afternoon, he looked up the address of the Thornhays archive. He didn't know what he planned to say or do, but he knew he had to see her one last time. He stood across the street from the sleek, glass-fronted building, feeling like a ghost haunting a future he had no part in. He looked shabby, out of place. He watched as people bustled in and out, their faces alight with energy and purpose. Finally, he saw her. She walked out of the main doors, engaged in an animated conversation with Adrian Thorne. They were looking at architectural plans on a tablet, and she was pointing at something, her face lit with a genuine, unforced smile. It was a smile of pure contentment, a smile he had never not once been able to give her. "Sophia!" he called out. His own voice sounded alien to him, thin and reedy. She stopped, her smile fading, not into anger, but into a calm, neutral mask. She turned, and Adrian stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her arm. He was a silent sentinel, a physical representation of the fact that she was no longer unprotected. "Gregory," she said. It was a simple acknowledgement of his presence, nothing more. I needed to see you," he began, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For what I said that night. That was just my ego, my fear. But it's the other thing. The phone call to the museum. That's the thing. I can't. I was scared, Sophia. You were so brilliant, and I was terrified you would leave me behind. So I made sure you couldn't. It was monstrous. I was a fool, a coward. He finally ran out of words, standing before her, stripped bare of all his former arrogance, a ruined man confessing his sins. Sophia listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, the silence stretched for a long moment before she spoke, her voice measured and devoid of malice. "Thank you for the apology, Gregory," she said, and the simple grace of her words was more cutting than any insult. "I accept it, but I need you to understand that I accept it for my own sake, not for yours, not for yours. Forgiveness is the last chain I had to break, to be truly free of the prison you built for me." She took a small step forward. "For a decade, I allowed your definition of me to become my reality. When you called me boring, I stopped looking for excitement. When you called my passions a hobby, I treated them as such. The great tragedy of our marriage wasn't the divorce. It was the slow, systematic death of my spirit, which I willingly participated in because I thought it was the price of your love." Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "This life I have now." She gestured to the building behind her. "I didn't build it to spite you. I built it on the foundation of the woman I was before I met you and the woman I became after I left you. My success isn't the opposite of you. It exists on a plane you can't even comprehend. It's a partnership built on mutual respect, not on fear and control." She gave him a final brief nod, a gesture of absolute dismissal. "I hope you find some peace, Gregory. Goodbye." She turned without a backward glance and walked away with Adrian. Their conversation resuming, as if he were nothing more than a crack in the pavement they had momentarily stepped over. Gregory Shaw stood on the sidewalk as the city bustled around him, a man completely invisible. He watched until she disappeared from view and the full weight of his reality crashed down. He had called her broke, and in doing so, had orchestrated his own ruin. He had called her boring, and in doing so, had condemned himself to a life of hollow, meaningless silence. He had spent years trying to build an empire, but he had only managed to construct a tomb, and in the end, he was its sole occupant. In the end, this wasn't just a story about revenge, it was a story about reclamation. Sophia Hayes didn't need to destroy Gregory Shaw. His own character did that for him. Her victory wasn't pulling up in a Bentley, it was rediscovering the woman who was brilliant enough to earn that seat. It's a powerful reminder that the most damaging opinions are often the ones we internalize from people who are terrified of our own potential. Sophia's story shows us that sometimes the greatest act of defiance isn't fighting back, but simply becoming everything they said you couldn't be. What did you think of Sophia's incredible journey? Was Gregory's downfall karma, or did he get what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you were inspired by this story and want more incredible tales of triumph and justice, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.
After being betrayed, poor wife, left with her son. Years later, the millionaire regretted it forever. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars never fade, especially the ones left by betrayal. Years ago, Clara Hathaway was a woman in love, swept into a world of wealth and privilege she never imagined. But in that world, she was never truly welcome. Humiliated, abandoned, and left to fend for herself while carrying a child, she walked away, determined to build a life on her own. Now, years later, the man who once cast her aside, the millionaire who had everything but valued nothing, is about to learn a painful lesson. Because fate has a way of turning tables, and when he finally comes face to face with the woman he wronged and the son he never knew, he realizes the greatest regret of his life wasn't losing his fortune. It was losing them. But is redemption possible? Or are some betrayals too deep to forgive? Stay with me as we uncover a story of love, loss, and a reckoning that will leave you speechless. Clara Hathaway was born in a small town outside Philadelphia, a place where summer nights buzzed with the chatter of cicadas and winter mornings glittered beneath fresh snow. Her mother, Margaret, worked long hours at a local diner. Her father, Charles, was a carpenter who never quite made ends meet. Despite their modest means, Clara was raised with immeasurable warmth and attention. She learned early on that one's value lay not in wealth, but in kindness and resilience. At 16, Clara discovered her talent for painting. She could transform a plain canvas into a riot of color and emotion, capturing sunsets, laughter, and heartbreak. To her father, she confided her deepest secret dream. Someday she wanted to see her artwork displayed in New York's famed galleries. He encouraged her to pursue it, always telling her, "You've got the heart of an artist, Clara. That's more valuable than any fortune." Fast forward to her college years at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied fine arts. Despite scholarship assistance, she had to work part-time at a catering company to meet her living expenses. It was at one of these events, a lavish charity gala in downtown Philadelphia, where fate intervened. She was on the serving staff that evening, wearing a plain black uniform with a crisp white apron. Meanwhile, Alexander Sterling, who everyone called Alex, was in attendance with his equally affluent friends. He was a young entrepreneur from a rich Boston family, heir to the Sterling Industries empire. With sleek dark hair and a confident smile, he carried an aura of effortless aristocracy. At that time he was 28, fresh from a triumphant business venture that netted him millions overnight. Alex was bored by the typical crowds at these high society events. Then his gaze landed on Clara, who was quietly serving champagne. Something about her delicate poise, the way she seemed comfortable in her own skin, even while hustling with a tray of glasses, captured his attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was doing her job, eyes shimmering with an unspoken dream. That night, he didn't immediately speak to her, but he remembered her face. An unexpected pang of curiosity gnawed at him. Days later, as if orchestrated by destiny, they crossed paths in the university courtyard. Clara, carrying art supplies, collided with him by accident. Charcoal sketches went flying into the wind. Alex knelt to help her gather them, and that fleeting moment crystallized something. A warmth in Clara's eyes contrasted sharply with the circle of opulence he was accustomed to. A conversation sparked, kindled by genuine interest. Their connection felt natural, like two pieces of a puzzle. Not long after, Alex asked her out for coffee. Clara, initially hesitant, finally agreed. Thus began a whirlwind romance that no one could have predicted, the up-and-coming millionaire and the down-to-earth artist. Their early relationship was woven with stolen kisses between classes, late-night walks by the Squealkill River, and confessions about their dreams for the future. She taught him how to see beauty in small things, while he introduced her to a world of infinite possibility and, admittedly, infinite temptations. In the eyes of the world, they were an odd pair, but in each other's eyes they found a perfect fit. Neither could foresee the heartbreak and public humiliations that would come, not in those early days when love seemed invincible beneath the star-swept sky. A year into their relationship, Clara began to see small fissures in Alex's otherwise flawless facade. While he showered her with gifts, a silver bracelet for her birthday, tickets to exclusive art shows, romantic weekend getaways, there was a guarded intensity lurking beneath his charm. He was fiercely ambitious, constantly surrounded by wealthy friends and business associates who had grown up in the same privileged circles. Clara found herself struggling to keep her footing in that environment. She was a self-made spirit, used to living frugally and working 2 part-time jobs. The ostentatious parties, the designer clothes, and the expensive champagne often felt alien. She tried her best to adapt because she loved Alex, and at times she couldn't help but feel like she was living in a dream, her new life a stark contrast to the diner in her hometown. However, she noticed that whenever Alex introduced her to his associates, An undercurrent of skepticism floated in the air. His friend group included names like Gregory "Greg" Ridley, the heir to a real estate empire, and Sabrina Marchant, a glamorous investor known for her strategic mind and predatory flair in business deals. They would smile politely at Clara, but she sensed their silent judgment. "She's not one of us." It didn't help that Clara was fiercely independent and unwilling to let Alex pay her bills. When he insisted on buying her a brand new BMW for her 21st birthday, she politely declined. "I can't let you do that," she said softly, hoping to appease his pride. "I can't even afford the insurance." The tension spilled over during an after-party at Alex's penthouse suite in New York. Clara witnessed Alex stress out over the slightest thing, like if a waiter brought the wrong brand of sparkling water. She also overheard him on a heated phone call with an investor, using cutting words that alarmed her. She approached him afterward, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" He brushed her off with a forced smile. "Just business. You wouldn't understand." That one line stung. You wouldn't understand. It implied an intellectual or experiential gulf that set them apart. She swallowed her hurt, attributing his brusqueness to business pressure. But the cracks had begun, hairline fractures in a seemingly robust relationship. In a quieter moment, Alex confessed his frustration about his father's looming presence. "I have to prove myself, Clara," he said. "My father thinks I'm just coasting on the sterling name." This vulnerability opened a window into his insecurities. Suddenly Clara understood. Alex's arrogance was partly armor to hide a fear of not being good enough. She tried to reassure him, saying, "You're talented, Alex. You have everything you need to succeed on your own." But sometimes no amount of reassurance can fill the void of self-doubt. Life went on, with fleeting moments of joy overshadowing the creeping sense of disconnection. Clara painted, Alex hustled for bigger deals. They still found comfort in each other's arms at night, but beneath the surface, the first cracks in their gilded life were forming. Neither realized how deep those fissures would soon become. By the time Clara graduated, their relationship had evolved into an engagement. Alex proposed in the courtyard where they first met, presenting a stunning ring that glistened in the afternoon sun. Tears of happiness spilled down Clara's cheeks as she said yes. She thought it was the happiest day of her life, a promise that their love would weather any storms. They scheduled a wedding for the following spring at a luxurious vineyard estate owned by Alex's acquaintance, Sabrina Marchant. It was to be a grand ceremony with hundreds of guests, business moguls, celebrities, and politicians. Word traveled in social circles. The young sterling scion was marrying an art school graduate of humble background. In the months leading up to the wedding, Clara frequently felt like a fish out of water. Under the guise of offering help, Sabrina took it upon herself to criticize nearly every choice Clara made for the wedding. "Darling, that color is too pastel," she would say, or "those centerpieces look cheap." Greg Ridley chimed in with remarks like, "I hope you're prepared for the tabloids," or "Are you sure you can handle the sterling lifestyle?" One evening, the humiliations reached a fever pitch. Clara and Alex attended a charity banquet in Boston, hosted by a prominent figure named Howard Winchester. The event was as glamorous as it was exclusive, featuring a performance by renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma and a buffet catered by chef Thomas Keller. Dressed in a pale blue gown, Clara clung to Alex's arm, trying to hide her nervousness. During dinner, an influential gallery owner named Meredith Walton approached their table. Clara had spent months yearning to meet someone like Meredith, hoping to secure a chance to showcase her art. Sensing an opportunity, Clara politely introduced herself, heart pounding. But before she could finish her sentence, Sabrina slid into the conversation, overshadowing Clara with boastful chatter. "Oh, Clara's art is nice," Sabrina said, her tone dripping with condescension. "She's got a lovely hobby, but her real focus, of course, is preparing for her new life as Mrs. Sterling." Laughter rippled around the table, though some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clara's cheeks burned. She looked to Alex, hoping he would speak up. Yet he remained silent, offering her a tight smile that seemed to say, "Let it go." Later, when Clara asked him why he hadn't defended her passion, he shrugged. "They didn't mean any harm. You can't be so sensitive." Hurt swirled in her chest. She felt minimized, cast aside as a mere accessory. The seeds of humiliation had taken root, each subtle jab or dismissive remark blossoming into bruises on her self-esteem. She tried to brush them off, told herself love and patience would prevail. But a small, insistent voice in her mind asked, "What if this is my life from now on?" She pushed that question aside, burying it beneath wedding plans and the dream of a happy future. Yet deep down, Clara began to realize that the wealth and influence surrounding Alex were not just gilded frames. They could also be chains, locking her into a world she never asked to enter. When the wedding day finally arrived, it was a sight to behold. The vineyard estate boasted rows upon rows of lush grapevines, an elegant pergola adorned with white roses, and a gentle spring breeze that carried a hint of lavender. Clara wore a gown embroidered with delicate lace, her hair styled in a soft chignon. Alex, in a tailored black tuxedo, looked every bit the dashing groom. From the outside, everything was perfect. Their vows, exchanged under a bright sky, brought tears to many eyes. Clara felt a wave of love and hope, as if the humiliations and judgments of the past months had dissolved under the promise of a new beginning. Alex squeezed her hands and whispered, "I love you." In that moment, she believed him wholeheartedly, but the reception that followed signaled the turning point. The exuberant celebrations included a cocktail hour, a 3-course dinner, and a band playing jazz standards. Among the well-wishers were many from the highest rungs of society, yet overshadowing the joy was a sense of competition and scrutiny. Every table buzzed with rumors about business deals, about who wore what designer label, about who was next in line for a board position. Clara felt more like a hostess to the wealthy crowd than a bride meant to be celebrated. Late into the evening, Alex's father, Lawrence Sterling, made a speech. He was a towering figure in a midnight blue suit, his hair silvered with age. Clearing his throat, he raised a glass. "A toast to my son and his lovely bride," he began, maintaining the veneer of paternal warmth. He extolled Alex's business achievements, commending the young man's instincts and cunning. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And of course, we welcome Clara into our family. May she be an excellent companion to Alexander and, someday, a wonderful mother to his children." The wording was subtle, but Clara felt a slap of reality. She wondered, is that all I'm meant to be? A companion and a mother, not a passionate artist with dreams of my own? From that night onward, Alex changed in small but significant ways. He grew more distant, immersing himself in expanding his empire. Their honeymoon was postponed due to pressing business matters. When Clara asked if they could still go for a shorter trip, he refused, saying, "We can't take half measures. I'll make it up to you." At first, Clara tried to be understanding. She painted in her new studio, a wedding gift from Alex, grateful for the chance to create. But the sense of disconnection nagged at her. Their intimate moments were overshadowed by his phone calls, dinners were rushed affairs, and he often returned home so late that she was already asleep. Then came the day she discovered she was pregnant. Clara felt joy surge within her. A new life was growing in her womb. She imagined a child who might inherit her artistic flair or Alex's quick mind. She hoped this news would draw them closer, heal the distant cracks that threatened to break them apart. But as she would soon find out, a new chapter of vulnerability and heartbreak was about to unfold, one that would test her strength in unimaginable ways. Pregnancy brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. She experienced morning sickness, fatigue, and a roller coaster of emotions. Yet her excitement remained steadfast. She planned how the nursery would look: soft pastel walls, a handmade mobile, and whimsical watercolor paintings. She tried to share these hopes with Alex, but he was more concerned about scaling up his next acquisition. "We'll hire the best decorators," he said absently. "Don't stress yourself." Often Clara found herself alone in the Sterling mansion, the echo of her footsteps magnified by the emptiness. She confided her fears in Margaret, her mother, who offered gentle words over long phone calls. "You have to stand up for yourself, honey. He's your husband, but that doesn't mean you should lose your voice." When she was 6 months pregnant, Alex organized a business event at their home to showcase new developments under Sterling Industries. Among the attendees were Sabrina Marchant, Greg Ridley, and numerous corporate elites. Despite Clara's condition, Alex insisted she host the event to show the family side of Sterling's brand. That night, as servers circulated with champagne flutes and caviar, Clara tried her best to be the gracious hostess, but a guest, slightly tipsy, made a dismissive comment about Alex's charity case of a wife. Clara overheard it, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She glanced at Alex, hoping for some defense, some recognition that such a remark was unacceptable. Instead, Alex delivered the final blow. While speaking about the future of his company, he made an offhand joke, referencing the logistical challenge of an unexpected pregnancy, implying that fatherhood had caught him off guard at a critical time in his business. The crowd chuckled politely. Clara felt every muscle in her body tense. Tears blurred her vision. She retreated to a corner, physically ill. Instead of comforting her, Alex appeared irritated. "You're making a scene," he hissed, pulling her aside. "Can't you at least wait until the guests leave?" That was the moment something inside her snapped. She realized with crystal clarity that she, and now their unborn child, were nothing more than accessories in his carefully curated life. She packed a bag that very night, tears streaming down her face. The next morning, she told him she was leaving. His response was cold and laced with anger. "If you walk away now, don't expect to come crawling back," he said. Clara steeled herself. In a quiet voice, she replied, "I won't." Divorce proceedings began swiftly. Alex's high-powered lawyers tried to keep the affair discreet, but rumors circulated. After all, he was a prominent figure. Some tabloids gossiped that she was a gold digger, others portrayed Alex as a ruthless playboy. Only a few recognized the reality. Two people once in love, torn apart by pride and humiliation. By the time the papers were signed, Clara had moved out to a modest apartment in Philadelphia, determined to rebuild her life. She ignored the hush money the lawyers offered. All she asked was to raise her unborn child in peace. She had no illusions about the difficulty ahead, but she also felt a surge of liberation. For the first time in months, the humiliations had lost their power over her. She was ready to stand on her own, for herself and her child. Late autumn leaves swirled around Clara as she stepped out of the courthouse. The final divorce decree rested in her trembling hands, marking both an end and a beginning. She was 7 months pregnant, yet somehow lighter. Freed from the stifling environment of Alex's world, she could finally breathe again. She moved into a small rented apartment in a neighborhood near Center City. It wasn't luxurious. The paint was peeling in a few spots, and the pipes clanged when water heated. But it was hers. She set up her easel by the largest window, where natural light poured in. Every morning she would make a cup of herbal tea, rest her hand on her growing belly and whisper, "We'll be okay." The struggle to regain her footing was real. She had to find a new job despite her pregnancy. Thankfully, a friend from art school, Jennifer Delgado, recommended her for a part-time teaching position at a community center. The pay was modest, but it allowed Clara to share her love of painting with children from disadvantaged backgrounds. She found solace in their joyful energy, in their bright eyes brimming with curiosity. At night, Clara painted. She poured her heartache and hope onto the canvas, exploring themes of metamorphosis, flowers breaking through concrete, birds taking flight. To her surprise, some of her pieces caught the attention of a small local gallery owned by an older woman named Rose Williams. Rose admired Clara's raw emotion, and soon Clara had her first local exhibit. Though it was a modest affair, it felt monumental to her. With each stroke of her brush, she rebuilt the fragments of her identity. Meanwhile, Alex was nowhere in sight. The only time she heard his name was through the occasional news snippet or social media post, touting Sterling Industries' latest triumph. While the tabloids briefly covered their divorce, interest waned when Clara refused interviews and Alex remained silent. Then came the day her water broke 2 weeks before her due date. Jennifer rushed her to the hospital. The delivery was neither simple nor painless, but after hours of labor, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Lucas. In her arms, Lucas's tiny fingers curled around hers, and Clara felt an overwhelming surge of love. Tears of joy mingled with sorrow that Alex wasn't there, but she pushed that thought away. This was her moment, her new beginning. Motherhood was a whirlwind of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and constant worry. But the first time Lucas smiled at her, all the exhaustion melted into pure adoration. She vowed to provide him with a life rich in love and creativity, even if financial struggles persisted. Days turned into weeks, and soon Lucas was cooing and kicking in his baby gym. Clara found a new routine: teach painting classes at the community center in the morning, care for Lucas in the afternoon, paint at night when he slept. Each day brought small victories: Lucas rolling over for the first time, Clara selling a painting for a few $100s, and the glimmer of confidence returning to her eyes. Yes, life was harder now without the safety net of wealth. Yet in many ways, Clara felt more whole than she had in a long time. The humiliation from Alex's world still haunted her sometimes in her dreams, but each sunrise reminded her that she was free to pursue her own path, and that meant more than any fortune could buy. Lucas was the sun around which Clara's world now revolved. He had a head of dark hair, a cooing laugh, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Even at just a few months old, he seemed alert to the colors and shapes around him, often babbling in delight when Clara painted. One chilly winter evening, as Clara gently rocked Lucas to sleep, she received a call from Margaret. Her mother was coming to visit. When Margaret arrived, she scooped Lucas up into her arms and showered him with grandmotherly affection. Margaret's eyes filled with pride at how her daughter had managed on her own. "You've done so well, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Clara's forehead. Still, the topic of Alex lingered like a ghost in the background. Margaret inquired politely, "Has he reached out?" Clara shook her head. Not once. Not even to check on Lucas. Her tone held sadness, but also resignation. She had made her choice, and she didn't regret it, at least not for her own sake. For Lucas, it was more complicated. She had once hoped that Lucas would know his father, but Alex's silence spoke volumes. In truth, Alex wasn't completely ignorant of Lucas's birth. He had been notified by his lawyers, who advised him on custody and support. Initially, Alex seemed content to settle everything through his legal team. Clara refused any large sums or monthly stipends. She worried that it might entangle her again in Alex's life on his terms. However, she didn't block him from acknowledging his child. She left that door open, hoping against hope that the father in him would care enough to walk through it. Time passed, and Lucas began to crawl. Clara took countless photographs of him, capturing every tiny milestone. She hung them on the walls, filling the apartment with memories instead of regrets. Occasionally, she posted a photo on social media, but only for a small circle of friends. She never tagged Alex, never sought his attention. Yet part of her still wondered, does he think about us? Behind the scenes, Alex was indeed thinking, though not in the ways Clara might have expected. He was consumed with regret, battling an internal war between pride and longing. He read every update his lawyer sent him about Lucas's progress. A part of him wanted to pick up the phone, to see his son for the first time. But another part, hardened by arrogance, believed that if Clara had really cared, she would have told him directly and invited him in. He rationalized his inaction with the thought that she chose to leave, so it was on her to bridge the gap. And so, father and son remained separated by ego and past hurts. Clara, meanwhile, focused on survival and small joys. She found time to paint whimsical scenes of mother and child, eventually selling them in the local gallery. She poured every ounce of love into Lucas, determined to give him the childhood she wished she'd had, one filled with security, affection, and an appreciation for life's simple wonders. No matter how tired she felt, or how her bank account dwindled some months, Clara never wished to return to the Sterling mansion. She had escaped a life that suffocated her soul. In her cozy apartment, rocking Lucas to sleep, she realized she had discovered something priceless, a sense of self-worth that no amount of wealth could ever replace. When Lucas turned 1, Clara threw a small birthday party in her apartment, inviting a handful of close friends from the community center and her mother. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, balloons, and the scent of a homemade vanilla cake. Lucas squealed in delight as he smeared frosting across his cheeks, his bright eyes dancing under the soft glow of fairy lights strung up around the living room. The party also marked a turning point for Clara's career. Rose Williams, the gallery owner who had taken an interest in her art, approached her with an exciting proposition, a solo exhibit showcasing Clara's motherhood-inspired series. Clara could hardly believe it. This opportunity was a beacon of hope, proof that she could stand on her own 2 feet, artistically and financially. In the weeks leading up to the exhibit, Clara poured her energy into creating her most personal paintings. Themes of rebirth, redemption, and maternal love dominated the canvases. She depicted silhouettes of mothers cradling their infants against dawn skies, phoenixes rising from ashes, a visual metaphor for her own transformation. Lucas often played at her feet, giggling and babbling as she worked. Whenever she felt a pang of self-doubt, she would look at him and remember why she had chosen this path. On the night of the exhibit's opening, a modest crowd gathered in Rose's gallery. The walls were lined with Clara's paintings, each radiating a sense of vulnerability and quiet strength. Jennifer Delgado was there, as was Margaret, who proudly told anyone within earshot, "That's my daughter's work." Among the guests was a familiar name, Meredith Walton, the influential gallery owner Clara had once tried to speak to at the charity banquet in Boston. Meredith had heard buzz about a raw, emotive collection by a rising artist and decided to attend. She introduced herself to Clara, this time with genuine interest. "Your work moves me," Meredith said. "There's honesty here that's rare in the art world." Clara felt her pulse quicken. She recalled how different things had been when Sabrina Marchant had overshadowed her in that humiliating conversation. Now she stood on her own, with her paintings speaking volumes. By the end of the evening, Meredith offered to collaborate, perhaps even connect Clara with larger galleries in New York. Clara agreed to stay in touch, feeling gratitude and excitement bloom within her. The success of the exhibit brought in sales, enough to allow Clara to upgrade her supplies and pay off some lingering medical bills from Lucas's birth. More importantly, it validated her decision to leave Alex and reclaim her life. Still, she couldn't escape a quiet sadness. She watched as other parents, particularly couples, strolled the gallery with their children. Lucas was happy, but he was missing something, a father figure. Clara had chosen to protect her son from an environment rife with humiliation and emotional neglect, but she wondered if she'd robbed him of the chance to know his dad. Each milestone in her success felt bittersweet, tinged with the memory of what once was. Yet for the first time, Clara felt truly alive, standing on her own merits. In her small corner of Philadelphia, with her son at her side, she was rising from the ashes of a broken marriage, forging her destiny with grace and determination. For Alex Sterling, life had continued in a superficial sense of triumph. He finalized a merger that doubled Sterling Industries' market share, earning him accolades from the business world. Lavish galas, Black tie events and high-stakes negotiations filled his calendar. To an outsider, it appeared he'd never been better. He was, after all, a multimillionaire still climbing the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. But beneath the polished exterior, Alex was haunted. Late at night, in the silence of his penthouse overlooking the city, he'd pour himself a glass of expensive scotch and stare at the city lights. His mind drifted to Clara, her laugh, her art, her unwavering gaze. He recalled how she used to rest her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the distant hum of traffic on the Schuylkill River. Now, every corner of his pristine home seemed devoid of warmth, filled only with the echoes of her absence. He'd received occasional updates from his lawyers about the baby boy, Lucas. Each time he felt a pang in his chest. His name was on the birth certificate. Clara hadn't contested that, but he had no relationship with his own son. Pride and shame kept him from reaching out. She left me, he told himself. She took my son with her. Yet a deeper truth gnawed at him. I pushed her away. One evening, Alex received an unexpected phone call from Sabrina Marchant. She was in town and wanted to meet for drinks. Initially, Alex hesitated. He knew Sabrina had always harbored more than a friendly interest in him. But he was lonely, and a part of him yearned for any distraction from the persistent regret. They met at a swanky rooftop bar, sipping imported wine under the glow of city skyscrapers. Sabrina talked about her latest conquests in the venture capital world, flaunting her cunning deals and high-profile connections. After a few drinks, she leaned in closer, placing a manicured hand on Alex's arm. "You know, you're better off without that artist," she said with a dismissive sneer. "She was never one of us." A wave of revulsion swept through Alex. It struck him how those words he might have once silently agreed with, now felt hollow and cruel. He recalled the look on Clara's face when Sabrina had humiliated her in Boston, how, in that moment, he hadn't stood up for the woman he claimed to love. Guilt swirled in his gut. He realized he couldn't stomach Sabrina's condescension anymore. Downing the last of his drink, he stood up abruptly. "I have to go," he muttered, ignoring her puzzled expression. Back in his penthouse, he paced the floor, wrestling with memories of Clara. He found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, a snapshot of them at a farmer's market, another where Clara was laughing at something silly he'd said. He stopped at a picture of Clara, pregnant, her eyes glowing with anticipation. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one, a lump in his throat. Within days, Alex caved to the urge he'd been resisting for over a year. He dialed the number his lawyer had given him, Clara's personal cell. It went straight to voicemail. Nervously, he left a brief message, voice trembling slightly. "Clara, it's Alex. I'd like to see Lucas and talk, if you're open to that." He hung up, heart pounding. Nothing he owned, no car, no mansion, no business success, could quell the fear of her rejection. For the first time, he laid bare a vulnerability that he'd spent his whole life hiding. Would she answer his call, or would she protect her heart and their son from the man who had failed them so profoundly? Clara's phone buzzed on a windy evening as she hurried into her apartment with groceries and a squirming Lucas in tow. Setting the bags down, she glanced at the screen and felt her heart jump. Missed call from Alexander Sterling. Voicemail 1. She stood frozen, conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd heard his voice. She pressed play, listening to Alex stumble through an awkward request to see Lucas. A chaotic mix of anger, sadness, and a faint sense of relief flooded her. He finally called. For days, Clara couldn't decide whether to return his call. She discussed it with Margaret, who advised caution but acknowledged that Lucas might someday want to know his father. Jennifer, ever the supportive friend, offered a listening ear, encouraging Clara to do what was best for herself and Lucas, without letting Alex's wealth or past hurt cloud her judgment. Ultimately, Clara opted to send Alex a text, keeping it brief and neutral. "I received your voicemail. We can talk about Lucas. Call me tomorrow at 7 p.m. Her hands trembled as she typed. She felt like she was opening a door she'd bolted shut long ago. The next evening, Clara waited in her living room, Lucas asleep in his crib. When her phone rang at exactly 7 p.m., she answered, heart thudding. "Clara," Alex began hesitantly, "thank you for taking my call." Silence stretched as she weighed her words. "I'm not sure what you want, but if you're serious about meeting Lucas, we need to establish some boundaries." Alex sounded nervous, a tone Clara had never heard before. I understand. I'd just like a chance to see my son, and to apologize." She considered the vulnerability in his voice. "All right, but I want it in a public place. I'll text you the details." They decided on a family-friendly cafe near Clara's apartment for Saturday afternoon. The days leading up to that meeting felt excruciatingly slow. Clara painted feverishly, trying to settle her restless mind. She reminded herself that this was for Lucas, not for any lingering feelings. Saturday arrived, crisp and sunny. Clara dressed Lucas in a soft blue sweater. He toddled around, babbling excitedly. She bundled him into the stroller and walked the few blocks to the cafe. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of freshly baked bread. She spotted Alex at a corner table, dressed in a casual jacket. No polished corporate suit, no entourage. He looked thinner, his hair slightly disheveled. When he saw them, he stood up, hands trembling at his sides. His eyes locked onto Lucas, who peered up at him curiously. Clara felt a pang in her chest when she noticed the glimmer of emotion in Alex's eyes, an unspoken regret and longing. "Hi," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex knelt down, meeting Lucas at eye level. "Hello, Lucas," he said gently. Lucas clung to Clara's leg, but stared at Alex with wide eyes. After a moment, Alex smiled tentatively, and to Clara's surprise, Lucas giggled. A wave of relief washed over Alex's face, as though he'd been granted permission to feel something he'd denied himself for too long. Thus began the first step toward an uncertain future. Their paths had collided once again, not as husband and wife, but as two people bound by a child, each carrying wounds that had yet to heal. The meeting at the cafe lasted over an hour. Clara sipped tea while Lucas, sitting in a high chair, snacked on crackers. Across the table, Alex's gaze shifted between his son and the woman he once called his wife. He tried to make small talk about Lucas's milestones, faltering in the face of Clara's guarded demeanor. Eventually, Clara found the courage to be direct. "Why now, Alex?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "You ignored us when I was pregnant, during Lucas's birth, his first steps. Why reach out now?" Alex swallowed hard. "I've thought about calling you every day. I was too ashamed and too stubborn." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I handled everything poorly, Clara. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a part of Lucas's life, if you'll let me." She studied him, trying to decipher whether his remorse was genuine or just another flash of guilt that would fade. Alex's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and his usual confidence seemed replaced by an almost childlike anxiety. For a moment, Clara remembered the Alex she first fell in love with, the one who wasn't afraid to kneel on a university courtyard to pick up her scattered sketches. "You have to understand," she began, voice trembling with pent-up hurt. "I tried to fit into your world. I tried to be the person you wanted me to be, but all I got was humiliation, and you just stood there, or worse, you joined in." She felt tears prick her eyes, but she fought them back, not wanting to break down in a public place. "I left to protect myself and Lucas. I won't expose him to that kind of environment where we're never good enough." Alex nodded, remorse evident. "I can't take back the things I said or did, but I've cut ties with people like Sabrina. I've been re-evaluating everything in my life. The bigger the empire I built, the emptier I felt." He glanced at Lucas, who was now trying to shove a cracker into his mouth with clumsy toddler hands. Meeting him. "It's like seeing the part of me that could still be good." For a brief moment, time stood still. Clara recognized genuine regret, the kind that shifts a person from the inside out. Still, her trust in him was broken. She refused to make any immediate promises. "I'll think about letting you see Lucas more," she said, her voice measured. "But let's keep it slow. Visits in public places, no overnight stays yet. And if at any point I feel Lucas's well-being is compromised, I'll end it." Alex's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," he breathed. They agreed to meet again. Clara packed up Lucas, who waved bye-bye in his toddler way. As she pushed the stroller out of the cafe, she felt an odd mixture of turmoil and cautious hope. She had confronted the man who had once broken her heart and left her carrying both a child and the weight of his disregard. Whether he could mend those wounds was uncertain, but for Lucas's sake, she was willing to try. In the following weeks, Alex slowly integrated himself into Lucas's life. The visits were sporadic at first, an hour at the park on a Saturday afternoon, or a quick lunch at a child-friendly restaurant. Clara watched him from a careful distance, observing how he interacted with their son. To her cautious surprise, Alex displayed genuine care. He pushed Lucas on the swing set, helped him learn new words by pointing at objects, tree, dog, sky, and even seemed entranced by Lucas's smallest gestures. The old arrogance that once defined him was largely absent. In its place was an awkwardness reminiscent of someone trying to make amends. Yet the road was anything but smooth. One afternoon, Alex appeared with a pricey remote-controlled car for Lucas. Clara immediately bristled. She pulled Alex aside. "He's two, Alex. He doesn't need something so extravagant," she said in a hushed, tense voice. Alex looked confused and slightly hurt. "I just wanted to give him a nice gift." Clara sighed, trying to calm her frustration. "He's a toddler. He values time and attention more than expensive gifts. Don't try to buy his affection." Alex's jaw tightened, but he nodded, placing the toy car aside. Clara recognized the tension in his expression. He was so used to solving problems with money. Part of her pitied him for not knowing another way. Slowly, she began to see that it wasn't just about Lucas. Alex was trying to learn to be a different man, and sometimes old habits died hard. Outside of these visits, Clara's life remained busy. Her artwork was gaining more recognition, and she juggled teaching at the community center with raising Lucas. Margaret visited often to babysit, giving Clara time to travel for potential gallery shows. On some nights, when Lucas was asleep, Clara would stare at her phone, half expecting a text from Alex. Though they spoke frequently about logistics, they never once delved into their relationship. Inevitably, the moment came when Alex asked, "Can I take Lucas to my place for a day?" He mentioned he'd baby-proofed his penthouse, ensuring every sharp corner and electrical outlet was secured. Clara hesitated. The idea of Lucas in the environment that had once suffocated her brought back painful memories, but she also sensed that keeping Lucas away forever wasn't fair to either of them. "All right," she said slowly, "but just for the afternoon, and I want to come with him the first time to make sure everything's okay." The day they visited Alex's penthouse, Clara felt a swirl of emotions. The modern decor, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, everything was painfully familiar and yet distant. She remembered countless nights here, feeling invisible, overshadowed by Alex's social circle. But this time, no crowd of wealthy friends awaited her. Instead, it was just Alex, who had a nervous energy about him as he greeted Lucas. She walked through the rooms, verifying that indeed the sharp corners were padded, the electrical sockets covered. The fridge was stocked with child-friendly snacks, and there was even a small corner filled with stuffed animals and building blocks. Alex had clearly made an effort. Despite the tension in the air, Clara was struck by a sense of possibility. People could change, given the chance and the will. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive Alex for all his past wrongs, but she recognized that he was trying. Maybe that counted for something. Nevertheless, she reminded herself, trust was a fragile vessel, easily shattered and painstakingly repaired. The question that lingered in her mind was whether their fractured bond could ever truly be mended. Months passed, and Alex became a regular part of Lucas's life. Saturdays were spent at the park or the children's museum. Wednesday afternoons, Alex would drop by the community center after Clara's classes ended, offering to help carry her supplies or simply watch Lucas color with crayons. Over time, Clara could see the bond forming between father and son. Yet the dynamics between the two adults remained fraught with unspoken feelings. Their conversations revolved around Lucas, his preschool options, his new favorite foods, the adorable drawings he made. They carefully skirted around their past relationship, though the tension between them was palpable. One rainy evening, after they had taken Lucas to a puppet show, Alex offered to drive Clara and Lucas home. Lucas dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the patter of raindrops on the window. As Alex pulled up in front of Clara's building, he hesitated. "Could I come up for a minute? I'd like to help put Lucas to bed, if that's okay." Clara bit her lip, torn. She finally nodded. "All right, but just for a minute." Inside, Alex gently carried Lucas to his small bedroom, tucking him into his toddler bed. He paused, gazing at the child's serene face. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded, unsure how to handle this sudden intimacy. When Alex emerged, he lingered in the hallway, their eyes meeting in the dim glow of a nightlight. 1,000 emotions welled up in Clara: love, anger, hurt, longing. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. Alex, too, seemed at a loss. Finally, he sighed heavily. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything." His voice trembled. "Leaving you alone while you were pregnant, not defending you when you needed it most. If I could go back—" "You can't," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. "Neither of us can change the past." Silence enveloped them, punctuated only by Lucas's soft breathing. Clara tried to remain composed, but tears gathered in her eyes. "You broke my trust, Alex. You let others treat me like I was nothing, and you treated me that way too." Alex reached out tentatively, but he didn't touch her. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." His eyes glistened under the faint light. "But I also know that I want to be here, with you and Lucas, in any way you'll let me." A storm of conflicting emotions roared within her. She was exhausted from carrying the weight of betrayal for so long. She had built walls to protect herself, but now those walls were trembling. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again the way I once did," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'll earn it back," he promised, a determined softness to his tone, "even if it takes years." They stood there, hearts raw and exposed, two broken souls trying to find a way forward. In that moment, Clara felt an odd sense of comfort in his presence. Despite the pain, there was still a spark, faint and wounded, but alive. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then keep showing up, for Lucas, for me. We'll see where that leads." Alex pressed his lips together, fighting back his own tears. "I will." And so they ended the night not with a passionate reunion, but with a promise to try. Sometimes the path to mended hearts begins not with a grand gesture, but with small steps born of genuine remorse and cautious hope. Over the next year, the delicate dance between Clara and Alex continued. Their progress was marked not by dramatic declarations, but by incremental shifts in how they treated each other, how they learned to co-parent, and how they faced the remnants of their shared past. Alex began attending Lucas's preschool events. At first, he would sit in the back row, cautious not to overstep, while Clara hovered protectively near their son. Over time, teachers and other parents grew used to seeing them together, albeit not as a traditional couple. Lucas's face lit up whenever both Mommy and Daddy appeared at the same event. The child's obvious joy pulled them closer in ways neither anticipated. Clara's art career continued to blossom. Her exhibit with Meredith Walton in New York was a modest triumph, garnering positive reviews in a few reputable art magazines. She found herself being commissioned for bespoke pieces, portraits, custom murals, and even a collaboration with a local non-profit to create a mural depicting family unity in a struggling community. Through her art, she channeled not just her pain, but also her healing. Alex, for his part, made conspicuous efforts to distance himself from his former social circle. He resigned from exclusive clubs where Sabrina Marchant and Greg Ridley reigned supreme, opting instead to invest his time and capital in philanthropic ventures. He funded scholarships at community art centers. He launched an initiative to develop affordable housing in Philadelphia's underserved neighborhoods. Though part of his motivation was altruistic, another part was personal. He wanted to become a man worthy of Clara's forgiveness, or at least her respect. In time, Alex also reached out to Margaret, inviting her over for a cordial lunch. The conversation was polite, laced with the awkwardness of two people who had once been family and were now working toward mutual understanding. Margaret was cautious but civil, recognizing that Alex was, indeed, making an effort to atone. An unexpected twist came when Clara was invited to showcase her work at a high-end art festival. The venue, a sprawling estate in Napa Valley, a location that stirred memories of her ill-fated wedding. When she hesitated to accept, Meredith Walton encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "Your art deserves that stage, Clara. Don't let old wounds rob you of new victories." After weighing her options, Clara agreed, deciding that facing her painful memories might help her move forward. As the festival date approached, she learned the estate hosting the event was none other than one owned by the Marchant family. Sabrina was rumored to be involved in the festival's planning. The prospect of seeing her again made Clara's stomach churn, but she pushed aside her discomfort in favor of professionalism. Alex found out about the show and, without hesitation, offered to accompany Clara and Lucas for support. At first, she refused. She didn't want any drama overshadowing her art. But as the date loomed, Clara recognized that having Alex there to watch Lucas would free her to focus on her exhibit. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they arrived in Napa, the air was thick with tension. The vineyard sprawled across rolling hills, the vines heavy with ripening grapes. Clara couldn't help but recall her wedding day, the same sweet scent of grapes in the air, the same manicured rose. This time, instead of wearing a bridal gown, she wore a simple linen dress, splattered with paint. In her arms was a portfolio of new pieces, reflective of her evolution, both as an artist and a person. She quickly set up her station. The festival drew in wealthy patrons, gallery owners from across the country, and socialites who loved to flaunt their taste for culture. Among them was Sabrina Marchant, who glided through the crowd in a sleek designer dress, exuding the same arrogant confidence as ever. Sabrina paused at Clara's display, her gaze flicking over the paintings with a detached curiosity. "You've improved," she remarked, a note of patronizing surprise in her voice. "I suppose motherhood can inspire creativity in some women." Clara steadied her breath, determined not to let Sabrina's condescension unravel her composure. Before Clara could respond, Alex stepped into view, Lucas in tow. The sight of Alex beside Clara seemed to jolt Sabrina, her usual cool demeanor cracking for a moment. She plastered on a grin. "Alex, darling, I didn't expect to see you here, and with the family no less." Lucas sensed the tension and clung to Clara's leg. Alex, voice calm but firm, replied, "I'm here to support Clara. This is her show." Sabrina's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, how domestic of you." Her gaze drifted to Clara's ringless hand, a smirk playing on her lips as though to remind them all of the past humiliation. Clara felt the old sting, but she met Sabrina's gaze evenly. "Thank you for hosting such a wonderful festival," she said politely, refusing to be goaded into conflict. She reminded herself that she was no longer the shy, easily intimidated woman Sabrina had once belittled. After an awkward silence, Sabrina retreated to mingle with other guests. Alex placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, exhaling. "Yes, I am." She realized the words felt true. She was okay. Seeing Sabrina no longer held the power to devastate her. She'd grown stronger, armed with self-worth and the knowledge that her art and her life could stand on its own. As the festival progressed, Clara's booth attracted genuine interest. A few collectors expressed intent to purchase her paintings. One of them was a famous musician, evidently struck by the raw emotion in her work. Another was a seasoned art curator from San Francisco, who invited Clara to join a group exhibition. By the end of the day, Clara had sold 3 of her pieces, netting more in a single afternoon than she used to earn in a month. She felt a dizzying mix of pride and humility. When Lucas raised his arms, demanding to be carried, Clara scooped him up and kissed his cheek. This was the life she'd fought for, a balance of motherhood, artistic fulfillment, and emotional independence. Alex, who had been standing by with a quiet smile, approached after the curator left. "Congratulations," he said. "I'm proud of you." Something about his tone made Clara look up. She saw tears brimming in his eyes, tears of genuine admiration. For a moment she felt the rush of old emotions, how she once believed in a future with this man, yet she also remembered the heartbreak he'd caused. Still, she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." That evening they attended a private reception for participating artists. Lucas stayed at the hotel with a trusted babysitter. Guests mingled under strings of fairy lights, sipping wine and sampling canapes. The afterglow of her successful day lingered around Clara, giving her a buoyant confidence. Alex hovered near her, engaging in light conversation about her artwork. When the event ended, they found themselves walking along a moonlit path between the grapevines, the night air fragrant with ripe fruit. Soft music floated from the distance, and the sky was ablaze with stars. Clara paused by a wooden fence, gazing out at the vineyard under the silver glow of the moon. The memories of her wedding day, of humiliations endured in this very environment, resurfaced. Yet, this time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of those memories. Instead, she felt a quiet release, as if the vineyard's night breeze carried away the last remnants of her pain. Alex stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how much has changed since we were here last. How much I've changed." She turned to him, caught off guard by his earnestness. He continued, voice tremulous. "I was so blind, Clara. Obsessed with proving myself, with living up to my father's expectations. I didn't realize I was stomping on the very love that gave my life meaning." Clara's throat tightened. "We both made choices," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm grateful for Lucas, but the pain we went through, sometimes it still feels so fresh." Alex nodded. "I know it's not something we can just forget, but I want you to know that I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making amends, if that's what it takes." Silence enveloped them, punctuated by the quiet hum of insects in the vineyard. Slowly, tentatively, Alex reached for Clara's hand. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch sent a cascade of emotions through her: regret, longing, affection, and an ever-present caution. She looked down at their hands, remembering how once upon a time their fingers entwined so naturally. "I don't know if we can ever go back to how we were," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I'm not asking to go back," Alex said. "I want to move forward, start anew, if we can. Even if it's just as co-parents who respect each other. But if there's a chance, even the slightest possibility, that we can rebuild something, I want that chance." Clara let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared. Our history it's messy." He nodded, eyes glimmering. "I'm scared too, but it's a good kind of fear, like stepping onto a stage to perform something meaningful." She closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. The memory of his earlier betrayals was still there. But so was this raw, honest version of Alex, who had spent the past year proving that he could be better. She had seen him cradle Lucas with care, volunteer at the community centre, support her art career without overshadowing it, apologize to Margaret, actions that spoke louder than any words. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her, breath held. She gave the faintest nod, exhaling softly. "Let's see where this goes, one step at a time." A tear slipped down Alex's cheek and he gently brushed it away, a soft laugh escaping his lips. He pulled her into a careful embrace, as though he might scare her off if he held on too tight. She rested her head against his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the sweet vineyard air. In that quiet moment, they weren't the broken couple they once were. They were two people forging a path toward redemption and, possibly, rediscovering love. In the months that followed, Clara and Alex navigated a new phase of their relationship. They saw a counselor together to address their past traumas, learned how to communicate without letting bitterness devour them. They fell into a rhythm of co-parenting that gradually blossomed into genuine partnership, and then something deeper. Their reconciliation didn't happen overnight. Clara insisted on maintaining her independence. She refused to move back into Alex's penthouse until she was certain this was what she wanted, not just what felt familiar. Alex respected her wishes, suggesting only that he spend more time in her apartment so Lucas wouldn't have to shuttle between two homes constantly. In the years to come, they built a life grounded in shared purpose. Clara opened her own art studio, mentoring young artists who faced financial barriers, much like she had in her youth. Alex continued to expand his philanthropic work, pouring resources into educational programs and community developments. Lucas grew up surrounded by a blend of creativity and compassion, learning that success meant more than money. It meant empathy, perseverance, and the courage to rectify one's mistakes. On quiet evenings, Clara and Alex often sat together in her studio. She painted, and he read or tinkered with business proposals on a tablet. Every so often he would glance up, catching her eye with a smile that said, "I'm grateful." She would smile back, painting a bright new stroke of color that symbolized hope on a canvas that was once filled with sorrow. And that, perhaps, was the truest form of a happy ending. Not a perfect life, but a real one, where two flawed individuals, bound by love and redemption, found the courage to forgive, to grow, and to create a future that honored the pains of the past without being defined by them. They had learned that sometimes the greatest fortune in the world lies not in riches or social standing, but in the fragile, resilient connection between two hearts, and the child who made their love story worth saving. And so, Clara and Alex's journey wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about rebuilding the future, one step at a time. From betrayal to redemption, from heartbreak to healing, they discovered that true love isn't just about grand gestures or second chances. It's about growth, accountability, and the courage to make things right. But what do you think? Can love truly conquer all? Would you have given Alex another chance, or was Clara's decision too forgiving? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful tale. There are more stories coming, filled with drama, twists, and life lessons that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good redemption story, and I'll see you in the next one.